Imagine managing miles of trail, each stretch bringing its own set of challenges, from storm repairs to planning new routes through the woods. What goes into keeping these trails ready for everyone, from weekend hikers to competitive mountain bikers? Welcome to Trail Nutz, the podcast that digs into real stories from real riders about real trails. I'm your host, Marc LeBlanc, and today we're diving into another incredible journey in the world of mountain biking. Today I'm sitting down with Andrew Beumer, an environmental services manager for Bruce County here in Ontario. He's responsible for some of the county's most diverse trail segments, balancing the demands of land preservation with the excitement of trail creation. We'll explore how these trails are designated for mountain biking, hear some of the special moments along the way, and get a peek into the unique experiences that make his role so essential. Andrew, thanks for being a guest on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.
Andrew, maybe could you just kind of elaborate on the role? I know when you and I chatted previously, it's not just about mountain biking. This is a mountain biking podcast, but I understand that it spans much beyond that.
Yeah, when I first started with the county, it was more of a trail-related role, but as an environmental services manager, I'm responsible for a number of different programs. So one is the forestry program. The forestry program is a big, kind of interacts with the trails program. We also have hazardous waste, noxious weeds. And so there's, other environmental programs as well. And of course, trails are just a small part of that.
Right. And tell me about I understand there's 4 trail segments that Bruce County looks after. Give me an overview of where they are and what they're all about.
Well, I guess it really is the county owns about 12,000 acres, and they're all kind of divided into different size parcels, right? So I guess the 4 properties that people are probably familiar with when it comes to mountain biking are probably the Brant Tract. You have the Carrick, the Lindsay Tract, which is up near Lion's Head, and the mountain bike park, which is called the Albemarle Tract, and that's just north of Wyerton. So those are the four properties, but we actually have other forest properties that do have trails, and most of them are related to motorized use. So yeah, there's quite a few. We have some tracks that have no trails, but the hope is someday to have some trails on those properties as well.
Of those 4 that you mentioned, which one is the most utilized?
That's a good question. I would say that the Lindsay and the Brant are probably the 2 busiest. And the only reason the Lindsay is probably as busy as it is because it's proximity to the national park in Tobermory. And so during the summer, it gets a lot of use. But then kind of the shoulder seasons, maybe not as much. And through the winter, it's a little quieter. Whereas the Brant is busy all year round. So I would say the Brant is probably Brant has more trail and probably more diverse trails as well. The terrain is very different. So if you look at the Brant is based, like all the trails are based on clay, right? And there's a little bit of elevation. We get up onto the peninsula, everything is rock, right? So it's much more technical riding. It's a little more challenging. So the trails feel quite a bit different than they would at the Brant. Whereas the Carrick is, a lot of elevation. It's kind of has a soil aggregate mix. So it stays dry most of the season, right? So it's one of those trails, after a day of rain, you can go and ride there, and it's fantastic, right? The Albemarle Tract is the north of Wyerton, and that one is very similar to the Peninsula Trails, where you have a lot of rock. We've brought in material, done some elevated trail work as well to make those trails flow a little better. But yeah, so they're all kind of unique and different. But of course, the Brant, I'd say, was probably our busiest one. They all kind of, I think you have riders that are hitting a few of the trails, and they probably all have their own favorite as well.
They are definitely all different. I personally have not ridden the Carrick Tract. I was at Lindsay Tract on the weekend. Very hard to navigate right now with all the leaves with the leaves down. Yeah. But I definitely know what you mean when you're basically riding up parts of the escarpment. It's a rocky grind. And it is definitely very similar to the Wyerton trails. I always tell people, if you want a good technical challenge, go ride Wyerton, because it's going to test you.
Yeah. Flow, probably like you can ride a little faster with the Brant than you can on the peninsula.
Definitely. Right? I would describe Brant as nice and flowy. It's a lot of fun. Definitely my favorite of the batch. How did the county get here with these trails? I understand at one point there may have been some discussion with the province.
Yeah, so I guess I got to kind of dive way back and really basically the county originally took on ownership of these lands in the 1930s, and they're called agreement forests under the Reforestation Act of 1927. So basically, under this act, the counties would purchase lands with the help of the province, and then the Department of Lands and Forests, which is now the MNRF, would basically provide professional forest management expertise for those properties. So basically, the late 90s, the MNR started to cut back programs and service levels. And basically what happened is a lot of these lands came back to the counties to manage. So the county at the time found itself in a bit of a predicament because they had no staff to oversee this. They weren't really sure what to do with these properties. And so the county did 20-year, they had a consultant come out and do 20-year forest management plans for the properties. And basically outlined in there was recreational opportunities. And the powers that be at the time decided, hey, this is a great opportunity to build a trails program. Like, economic development was really big at the time in the early 2000s. And they're looking for ways to bring people to the county because people are already coming, but they're doing other things, right? We wanted people to come to the county to use our trails, but we also want it to be a primary trip motivator for people to come. So mountain biking seemed to be a really good fit. All of us mountain biked, and basically in 2001 was the first pilot project, which was the Brant. And I was lucky enough to be a part of that project. And I had moved from Ottawa to come and design trails. And if I want to dive a little deeper into the history, basically, the idea was to design these trails and then have volunteers build them, right? And we had a bit of a base of volunteers, and but one of the things we really wanted to do was build them at a quicker rate. And we looked at a lot of different government funding. There was a lot of, back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of job creation programs on the provincial and federal level, and youth initiatives programs. So we decided to use these initiatives to build trails, and our first grant was from the federal government for a youth initiatives program, and we were given basically $250,000 to build trails over a 10-month period, and we had 12 workers out, and of course most of the trails started out as hand built at the Brant. Of course, we use mechanized equipment now, so which is a little faster, and you can do a lot more with your trails than when you hand build. But that's how all the trails were all built. And we did that with most of our properties and up to about 2017. And we had about 100 kids that have come through the program over the years to build trails. So a lot of success stories there with the program. But that's kind of how it all started, and a little bit of history of our forest tracks and how the program started.
So with the volunteer approach and the funding, is that still how the trails are maintained today?
No. So with the volunteer, we've had some success with volunteers. There's a little bit of a challenge having volunteer days because we set up these days and then nobody shows up, right? So a lot of our trails are actually maintained by staff. So now we have service levels. So we have a technical document that has levels of service in there. And a good example of that is, all the non-motorized trails, so the four that we've talked about, which are the Brant and the Bike Park and the Lindsay and the Carrick, are all maintained by county staffs. And we have a number of things that we're looking at where we're doing those inspections, but they're all based on infrastructure. So at the Brant, we have a lot of bridges. So those trails are checked biweekly. So anything with the infrastructure is checked biweekly, and then trails that do not have infrastructure are checked monthly. Now, with our motorized clubs, we have, they're responsible for doing those inspections on our behalf. That's part of the agreement we have with them. As far as the four properties, it's all done by county staff.
Very nice. I know I have definitely experienced you go out 1 week after a storm and there's something down and it's back up and running pretty quick. So yeah. I think all the riders appreciate that.
Yeah.
Tell me how you've mentioned a Trails Master Plan. How does that play into all of this?
Well, I think, I think there's always been demand for trail. I think back in the day, it was pretty easy to, write in a proposal with the government, get some funding and focus specifically on one property. And of course, we have all these properties, and there's a need to probably expand in some areas or make improvements. And of course, during COVID, I think we saw a major increase in the use of our trails and our forests, and there was a lot of demand by the public and stakeholder groups that want to see more trail development. So at the time, just after COVID, we were like, all these requests coming in. We thought, well, this is a good time to open up to the public and with our stakeholders and get a consultant to help us through this process and develop a master plan and identify which areas we need to focus on. And through that process, we did develop a master plan. And one of the biggest items that people want to see was more wilderness trails. Like 97% of the respondents in our master plan survey identified wilderness trails as a priority to them, right? Whether it was for biking or horseback riding or just nature appreciation. So through that process, we came up with some areas that we'd like to focus on, and we presented to council, and it was received by council in September 2023. And we have some of those items in our 2025 budget. So if those items are approved, then we'll be looking at doing some improvements.
Yeah. Excellent. Are there any of those that you'd like to mention that we would like to see?
Well, I think of course. Well, I think people want to see more activity at the Brant, right? And that is an area that we are focused on. I think some of we have other areas where we want to draw our attention. So the Lindsay Tract is one area, and just because of the extent of the property, it's pretty unique. Like we have interior lakes that are in there. We'd like to provide access to those areas. It's maybe it's a little more wild up there, which is kind of interesting. Of course, there's a lot of pressure on the national park and a lot of the private campgrounds, and we just want to kind of provide another place for people to go. I'd say the Brant is still up there as well, but we also have parcels down at the south end, right, towards Teeswater, and over towards Kincardine. It'd be nice to build on those. So over the 5 years, we're going to be doing quite a bit of work, and the Brant is included in that. And I will say that, stay tuned. There will be some interesting things happening there. And I think that's all I'll say about that. I hate to say too much because everything is base approval and, of course, resources and things like that, right?
Well, fingers crossed. Tell me about some of the uses that go on at these trails. Like, I'm wondering if there's been any kind of like after school racing, anything like that that's happened over the years that you can remember.
Yeah, well, like there's I think at the early stages of the Brant, there was a lot of private groups that wanted to do races, and there was a number of them that took place. And of course, people can organize those type of events, but there's a lot that goes into those because generally we're closing off the trails to the public. You require insurance to run those type of events. There's just a lot of work, and we don't see them probably as much anymore, probably because it's difficult maybe to get insurance. I'm not really sure, right? But we do have some races, and they're conducted by the Blue Water School Board, and they have a race at the Brant every season, and that's been going on for a number of years. So there are races. We also have the dog sledding as well, races that take place there. And that usually happens in the fall and the spring. And that's dry land training type of activities. They're not using it as much in the winter, but just more or less for the fall and spring uses. But so you get the odd events. The county has the early on program, which they bring young families out to the property and they talk about the different tree species and plants and things like that are at the property. So there's definitely little activities here and there that take place at all the properties.
Got it. I think it's great that the county does have the chance to support those development programs like with Blue Water School District. I think it's so important. We have such great access to great terrain for these young riders that are really interested in exploring what mountain biking is all about. So it's great that we can provide that. Tell me a little bit about the winter season at the Brant. And I'm asking for a very specific reason because I took my mountain bike out last I think it was January 1st or January 2nd because I'm crazy. And there was a number of folks that were out on fat tire mountain bikes. Do you typically see a continued use for mountain bike riding through the winter, or do you see a decline?
I would say we see an increase. I think, the days of mountain bikers having one bike it just doesn't happen. Everybody has 3 or 4 bikes, right? And everybody seems to have a fat bike, and people are looking to be active in the winter. And I think you see that a lot at the Brant. Out of any of our properties, like you see use there all year long. Like the extent of the trails that are being used are I wouldn't say every single trail is being used, but probably 80% of the trails are being used by fat bikes. So there's a real growing, I guess, demand for fat biking. And of course, these bikes are creating trail. And what's really great about it is it allows other people to use them as well, like if you're hiking or skiing and things like that. So as far as I know, I like, they're not designated for one specific use, but like in the winter, the fat bikes really do make it easier for other people to use their properties. It's kind of like snowmobile trails, right? Those trails are packed and people can walk or ski on those trails. And I see it very similar with fat biking at the Brant. It certainly makes it easier for us to get around, and especially when there's trees down or hazards we need to deal with. But I say that is growing, particularly there. And I think we're going to continue to see that grow for years to come, the fat biking. And I don't think it's even a trend anymore. I think it's just something people do, right?
Yeah, it was fascinating to watch. I don't have a fat tire bike. I fantasize about getting one, but I was on my regular mountain bike, which is sitting behind me here. And it was these couple older gentlemen, and they just cruised on by me. And I said, that looks like a lot of fun in the snow, as opposed to my regular mountain bike. Kind of one of the last topics I'd like to dig into with you, Andrew, is just when you're building those trails, how did you approach that? Were you using standards put out by IMBA, or is there another methodology? When you started crafting the Brant years and years ago, how did that come to be, and how has that evolved?
I would say that all of that is pretty much related to IMBA, right? So the first trail crew that was before they even had a Canada, a branch, IMBA from the US, they came up and did a workshop in 2001, Marc and Laura, and they had been to our property a number of times and put on a number of training workshops. So I was lucky enough to be a part of that. And of course, they have some great textbooks with diagrams and information about building sustainable trails, contour trails. So everything that we've done there is really based on IMBA standards, and of course, all standards, they're best practices, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't always work, right? So we've had to kind of create our own things that work for that property. But basically, that's where all that comes from is through the IMBA standards. Was there another part to the question there, Mark? You were just asking me.
It's just exploring how IMBA, and for anyone that doesn't know, that's the International Mountain Bike Association.
Okay.
Just how that applied. Were there other things? And your response kind of goes as I would expect. They have a number of standards. You're going to adapt what works, and you're going to adjust what doesn't. I think that's pretty common anytime there's a framework like that.
I think when we look at their standards and how we've implemented trails, and we're trying to keep them as sustainable as possible, right? Because obviously trails that are built improperly require a ton of maintenance. And the more time we spend on maintenance, the less time we spend on working on other trails, right? So we get a lot of requests. People say, well, geez, we need more downhill. We need stuff like that. But when we get to fall line trails, things like that, they look great at first, but then they start to erode within a year or two. And then before you know it, you're shutting those down. And once you try to shut down a trail, it's really difficult to keep it closed. So obviously a lot of thought and time goes into how we lay out our trail systems and how those trails interact with other trails. Obviously we look at emergency services, things like that, but also, the user experience and what type of experience we're trying to provide, right? So all those little things go into that process when we're looking at trail design.
When you're thinking about new trail design, or you're thinking about shutting down, a trail it needs some time to rejuvenate, what are some of those signs that you're looking for? What's an indicator to the team?
Well, I think, I think we've only shut down one trail in the years that we've been operating, and that was due just because it was a hand-built trail, and over time it just started to erode and things like that. And that particular trail we would like to open again. It's going to take some time, but I think some of the things we look for. So generally through the inspection process, we're identifying different things. So, it could be erosion, root exposure. Maybe it's the way people are riding it. Maybe people keep, flying off that, like if maybe the turns are too tight, right? Things like that. So those are things that we look at, and when we decide when we need to make improvements or maybe whether a trail needs to be closed. We haven't really got to that point. We get trails like, the Maples at the Brant is one that was just redone this year. And, it was showing a lot of root exposure. It was a trail that was built in, I think, 2007. So all trails require, a level of maintenance, right? But that trail could have been one that, there was a section there that we rerouted because there was a fall line and it was eroding the side of the hills, creating all kinds of issues. It was killing trees. So that was an area that we had to do. So generally we don't close trails, but we do reroutes, right? Or we do raised tread construction, which kind of helps alleviate some of that damage and extends the life of the trail. But it definitely helps that we've used those IMBA standards, right, over the years to create sustainable trails, but they still require a level of maintenance for sure.
Yeah, I rode the Maples at Brant a couple weeks ago. It's quite nice how it's kind of extended. I can't even tell you where you've deviated from the hill. I know the hill you're talking
That's
about.
good.
I don't think that's even just riding along, and all of a sudden you're back like, oh, where's that part that used to be here? So it was a great job by you and the team. So thanks for that.
Thanks.
Andrew, we've been kind of chatting for a little bit. I think I've covered all the topics I was hoping to really dig into. The last one I'd be amiss if I didn't ask, because my 12-year-old wants me to. Is there any plans to build the jump park anywhere on the peninsula?
I think, I don't think we're a jump park necessarily. I think we're staying away from those technical trail features and things like that.
Of course.
But like the bike park has it's a pump track, and it's something that, we're trying to maintain. We need to do a better job. I think when you get into those type of skill parks, they require a ton of maintenance, right? And if you don't have the resources, they just kind of fall to they just slowly start to disintegrate, and then the experience just becomes a negative one, right? And I think we have enough to focus on just single track and double track type trails that we're kind of focused on that. We want to create more access in our properties, and maybe someday we'll get into, jump parks and things like that. But unfortunately, we're just not, we don't have the capacity. I think if anything, we'd like to create more beginner type trails, especially at some of our properties where there really isn't that great of a variety. It's really nice to have young kids come out and even older people that aren't used to be on mountain bikes, is to give them a really, great experience. And, sometimes those trails need to be fairly easy, right? But of course, we want them nice and open and flowing. I'm not talking about a linear trail, but I'm talking with something that requires a little bit of technical level, but at the same time is quite easy to ride. So those are things that we want to focus on.
That makes a lot of sense. I think you have a great experience for some folks like that at Wiarton. There's that nice easy loop just from the parking lot. You're not just on that double track. You're into a little bit of trail.
Yeah.
But it's safe, and you're going to get the experience without worrying about getting hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I can just sort of recap a couple of things that I'm taking away from this, right from the origins in the early 2000s or earlier when these trails started, you've kind of developed this trails master plan, giving us a path forward on what you'd like to see evolve. I like the sounds of getting access to additional trailing in properties like Lindsay Tract. If that couldn't happen in the next 5 years, that sounds amazing. And really just the focus around, I'm going to call it accessibility for all levels of riders and users for these properties. It's really important for the community, I imagine. I know as a rider, I really appreciate that we have access within an hour to 4 different trail networks where I'm at just north of Owen Sound. Andrew, thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it and look forward to getting out and riding the trails again. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks so much.